express why they really want to be a part of. And I think it's a great thing that we are having this conference call on Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. And during this time, I have heard some very, very strange things in this time of being Dr. King's birthday, especially listening at conservatives' quips about Dr. King, what he represents, what he would be doing if he was here right now, and all of those different things. And all they basically did was to put a spin on the way that they always feel and what they normally do and what they normally feel about minorities and about black people and poor people. And they just put it in the context of Dr. Martin Luther King. But their arguments did not change from what they thought of him, what they thought of his message, and in that day and time, in fact, the same positions they took against him at that time. So, but it was strange, some of the things that they had to say. And their position has not changed where black people and poor people are concerned. They are saying the same thing. And we need to look back on this as people who are taking the position that they have. It's no different. Same people who objected to his birthday being nationalized, the same people who disagree with the whole purpose of it. They're in the same place. So it's just amazing that they would come out and say these things. Now, I'm saying that for this reason. So people would not think that there is this big change in the world and how we are progressing forward and moving forward and people are different in all of these things. Now, the reason why I say that is this. I mentioned something once before about if you know the end, then you can backtrack into the steps of those that are taking their place, and you will see that they are gradually moving toward what the predicted end is. And when I say the predicted end, that is not just what the Lord himself has said, but that's what Satan's plan is. And if you know that, then you basically know who is in Satan's plan. But you need to understand this, and you need to know this. Satan has absolutely no mercy whatsoever when it comes down to conducting his program. And you're dealing with people who have made a blood vow, that not their family, not the laws of the land, not the United States Constitution, not even their family, nothing comes before this organization that they have joined in to make this happen, and have gone so far as to proclaim Lucifer as God, and to try to convince people that what the Bible did was turn around the fact that Lucifer is really the chosen one. So when we half step on the things that God has told us to do as Christians, you have no idea what you are doing. You cannot deal with an enemy like that. He is not changing his spots at all. So, to hear conservatives and talk show hosts and even some Christians talk about Dr. King today and what he meant and what he stood for, and still turn it around to beat up on the poor, the earning minimum wages and food stamps and all of the things that poor people have always had to fight for, to keep that image before the nation as just being people who want to live on the government, want handouts, and want to be given to. And once that image is set in folks' mind, not even black people want to be associated with that. So we start distancing ourselves from our own people because they don't want to be associated with those kind of characteristics that have been set out there, not knowing that, those things were set by them. So all of these things are in the back of my mind as dealing with the summit and the conference. The only thing is I'm going to be showing biblically why and how we got to that place and what is God's order in terms of settling the situation. Because a lot of people think that, just so long as they are Christian and, well, these folk were considered Christian. I remember watching a program, and this was back when we were trying to get sanctions on South Africa, and we were trying to influence President Reagan to go on and finalize it and not do sanctions against South Africa. Of course, he did, and he was vetoed. There was a forum set up by Jerry Falwell, Cal Thomas, and a Congressman Danan, and some other couple of other white ministers that were there. And they were speaking certainly against Jesse Jackson and thinking he could run for president. And Falwell said, Jesse, you were so good when you were trying to get the kids to stop using drugs and the mothers from having babies. And why don't you go back to doing that basically you're out of your league to even talk about considering a run for president. And he went down the line of Bishop Tutu being a phony and South Africa is our friend and why we ought to continue to support South Africa. I have an article here, if I took time to read it, but we do not have the time to read it. It was written by P.W. Botha, who was the president of South Africa at that time. He lays out a plan for mass genocide of South Africans at that time. This is August 18, 1985. And he lays out a plan that would blow your mind. And he said that he can openly and arrogantly say these things because America, Europe, Australia, all of them really feel the same way. But he was bold enough to speak it out. He said if blacks cannot rule themselves, if you give them guns, they will kill each other. They're good for nothing else but making noise, dancing, marrying, and marrying many wives and indulging in sex. He's openly saying what he says all of them really believe. So he said, don't be moved by what you hear Americans saying about equality, because in their hearts, they really believe and feel the same way that we do. Now, I didn't say that. That's P.W. Botha saying that August 18, 1985, about not only their feelings about blacks, but their plan for mass genocide and to get rid of them. He even mentions here about planting white women among the men to destroy them, and how that they were going to put poison into the soda pop that was favored by blacks. This is taking the thing a long way. But at the end, the thing that's so mind-blowing is he says that we good, God-fearing Christian people. And these are the kind of things I think that mislead some people when we hear about everybody is Christian and all those folks that love God. But I say all the time that there is a difference in Christianity and church last week, and I was sharing this with the men. Christendom includes anybody that names the name of Christ or say that they are Christians and may not believe what Bible says, may disagree with Bible, may deviate from what the Bible says, do a whole lot of things that does not correspond with Bible, that can be involved in witchcraft and a bunch of other things. They could hate people and still say that they are Christian. That's Christendom. Christianity complies with everything the Bible says because we are asked to surrender our lives to Christ. That's what it means to say he is my Savior and my Lord. A lot of people, everybody want to be saved by him, but they don't want to give up the lordship and let him be Lord of my life. And Jesus explained it. He said, why call you me Lord and do not the things that I say? So it is surrendering oneself totally to Bible and to Christ, exactly what he says that we will follow out. All these other differences that churches have and disagreements with denominational differences, all that stuff, these are things that the enemy is using to do nothing but separate and divide. But Christendom includes and drags in almost anything and anybody. Let me give you an example, because if you don't know, you ought to know this. Rick Warren, who is a very popular pastor, claims to be Christian. And you remember he was the one giving prayer at either Obama's inauguration. I don't know whether it was the benediction or the doxology now, but he gave that prayer at the end. And Rick Warren was among several other preachers that got together with several other imams and Islamic ministers and to sign an agreement that we are going to be peace-loving, we're going to be interfaith sharing. And he went on so far as to say, we're not just going to talk about this. Talking interfaith is nothing. He said, I want to see what we are going to do. But in the process of that letter that they all had to sign, it said that they were to repent to Allah for having at any point in time in their life worked against him, preached against him, or anything that they have said, to repent to Allah, then sign this agreement that they will in turn work together. And so, using language that basically said Christ was no different from any other so-called Messiah and God that they had, he signed that agreement along with other ministers, so-called ministers, Christian ministers. He signed that agreement. That is to put Allah above Jehovah, above Yahweh. That is to put him above Christ. That is to lower Jesus to the level of Muhammad or Buddha or any other of those so-called pagan gods. That is what that is to do. But it fits with the kind of language that people are speaking today, trying to be inclusive, trying not to offend anybody, trying to say all the kinds of things that are the public and what's popular and what people are saying. But in the summit, I want to show the reason why that God is trying to use Hamitic people in this particular time, in this particular era, because it is the age that calls for it. I have mentioned that August this past year was the 50th celebration of the Civil Rights Movement, and it was 50 years ago that the Civil Rights Movement actually started. And this was also the official dome of adding the gay rights movement on to the Civil Rights Movement. Many articles were saying that the gay rights movement is the fastest growing civil rights movement ever. They have the money, they have the political positions, that they are in positions to set new definitions of what it means for the to be civil rights movement. Now, this is my opinion. My opinion is the civil rights movement is dead. And we can see most of the stalwarts of the civil rights movement are dying off. And there's a change in many of them who are saying things that we know Bible does not say. Dr. King and Shuttlesworth did not agree with, and yet these things are being said. Well, this is my effort to try to do something about it. It's a different era. It is a different sphere of time. And when these times come about, God started making changes. Let me give you an example. In 1453 BC to 1452 BC, Miriam died, Moses' sister, at the beginning of the year. About the middle of the year, Aaron, Moses' brother, died about the middle of the year. At the end of the same year, Moses died. That meant all three of them died within the same year. And this is recorded in Deuteronomy as well. So it is just before the people of Israel and Joshua cross over Canaan into the promised land. Now, that's important because you're looking at an entire era dying. The purpose for which God had raised them up had been done. It had been completed. He had led them 40 years throughout the wilderness. He had prepared Moses. He had taught him at Jethro's house, and now he had entered into the real purpose for which he had raised him out. And it was Moses who named Joshua. He changed his name to Yehoshua, which means the same thing as Jesus, which indicates they were moving into a different dispensation and a different period in time. Throughout Bible, you will see that these numbers that I mentioned about 40 being the number of maturity, and the number when one dispensation is ending and another dispensation is beginning. I believe that we are moving into that dispensation right now. We're moving into the period where changes are going to be made. Why do I say that? And I want to stress the importance of it. The reason is because when we deal with Hermetic people, black people, there are a lot of things about us we don't understand. We can say it. We're critical of each other about it. We evoke no confidence in each other. We ostracize each other. We kill each other. And yet, when we try to find reasons why, as I always tried to do, particularly in ministry, there were no answers. Why do we do that to each other? Why are we so eager to destroy each other? Where does this critical spirit come from that we can so easily take that particular stance? There was a guy, you may have read it yourself on Black News, Black Voices, and he said that he had got this Jewish friend, and he and his Jewish friend was talking, and he said that the Jewish guy told him, said, you know, what we call your people and what we think of your people among ourselves? He said, no. He said, we think of you as liquid money. He said, because you're going to spend everything you have among the Chinese, the Europeans, the Hispanics, and the Asians. So to us, you are the liquid money. Wherever there is a market in the midst of you, we should set it up quickly because we're going to get your money. We know that it's going to definitely come. There is no confidence in one another for us to believe that we can make these changes. Those things, I believe, are locked into the Hermetic purpose, the Hermetic inheritance, the Hermetic covenant, because definitely God did not intend it to be that way. So if God did not intend for it to be that way, how did it get like that? And how did it last so long? And where are the changes where these things are going to be done? And often when we start talking in terms of changes, excuse me, we start talking in terms of job programs and agencies and all of these things. And history is replete with this kind of era. And why am I calling it an era? Because it is to put the cart before the horse. This is what we have always concluded that we must do where black people are concerned. We never put the spiritual in its place and proceed from there. Because if it is true, like I said earlier about Satan and those people who work with him, we are up against powers that are unimaginable. If you could put on some spiritual glasses and see in the spirit what is out there before you, what you're up against, and the power that we have to fight against it, I'm sure we will be standing in awe at the reality of it, at the strength and power of it, which tells us we only need Christ. Spiritual power is very, very important. But if we're going to neglect that and not put the emphasis on that it should be, then we are making the mistake that history has always made. This is one of the reasons that Israel missed Jesus. Because when he came, he didn't come riding on a horse. They wanted to see him come like a great conqueror. He come riding in on a donkey. Well, one of the reasons is because power always rides on humility. And Jesus came poor. He had no sword. He had no money. He didn't even have a horse. And this is the way he came. So the Jews rejected him because to be blessed, to have the wherewithal was a sign of the fact you were blessed by God. So Jesus was again defying all of their thinking about who God is and what God is. He stood against it. And they missed it because they put the cart before the horse. They didn't think spiritual things was that important. So to understand this is to say we must put the spiritual in its place. We must have Christ in our lives in the way that Bible says he ought to be. Otherwise, we're going at this thing backwards. Now, I'm going to get ready to stop here in a moment and give you a chance to ask whatever questions that you might have about anything that I'm talking about here. And we're trying to stay within the subject matter of the Hermetic and the answers for Hermetic people and how that all of this may be done. Now, you know, if I just said what I said about a program, then obviously Lifeline is different from just a program. And I've seen, believe me, over the years, I've seen many of them put on, have been pulled in many groups politically, spiritually, trying to do programs. I saw right after the 60s and trying to do what Dr. King had been begging the Kennedys to do and create the jobs program and job places where they were going to train people forward. All of those places where they had designated were people with lands that white conservatives and Democrats own. In other words, I'm saying the benefits regarding the jobs, being taught the jobs, being open doors for the jobs, and all these kind of things were done by white people. So the money went right to them. It did not help the people that they were on the hill wrangling about. The answer, and I think the key is, we're going to have to get down to what it's going to take for us to do what we need to do. And again, I'll say it. If I'm going to talk like this, I obviously must be going in an entirely different direction. That is why I implore you to find out what you can about it. See if I know what I'm talking about. See if God is in this. See if it works with what the Bible says. And I think that you're going to be amazed at what God will do. Has anybody got any questions so far? Okay. Well,
how you doing, Bishop? It's Noah.
Okay, good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, I have a question. It's a concern of mine too. You know, when we start to talk about and deal with the Hermetic Covenant, I know that we're dealing with, you know, African Americans, African people around the world. We're dealing with, you know, all of us in every condition, wherever we are.
Right.
And many of us come from parts of the world where we still speak Hermetic languages.
Right.
You know, which have Afro-Asiatic roots and Semitic roots in the dialects and so forth. And in these languages, we don't use words like God to describe the Almighty Creator. We still use terms that are rooted in the old languages. So when we say things like Allah, just like in the Hebrew, when you say Elo, like when Jesus on the cross, he called my God Eli, which is the same root word as Allah. And some of the old language Hamitic words, I'm just hoping we don't start to confuse language with how modern culture has taken, you know, their cultural direction and their use of these words, and then combine that with, you know, what their idea or concept of God is, and then condemn everything that's related to who God is. And you know, all that to say, there is a lot that we are not familiar with as it relates to, you know, African people. So as we start to bring them back into the Hermetic Covenant, I want, you know, or at least it's my sincere hope that that we go approach it with a broad mind, because a lot of people can confuse what we're saying to say that, you know, we have a disrespect for the very thing we come from, which is the culture and the language of the people. When we say, you know, if we appear that we don't understand, you know, who Allah is, as Allah meaning God the Most High, Just like in the Hebrew is pronounced El and Elo, and the same as Yahweh. These terms just being very old terms. Just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I don't think that there's any problem understanding who actually God is, and Allah is more than a linguistic understanding. It's more than that. The origin of Allah is definitely demonic. Those that have followed was definitely demonic, and I'm not just talking about 1622 when Muhammad was supposed to have been converted to Islam and the revelation that he was supposed to have gotten, but the different names under which gods, plural, were worshipped did not have anything to do with Jehovah. And this was another one of the reasons why he wanted to make a difference in who the followers of God actually was. But if the languages is going to be the foundation on which we build the program or build what we're going to do, we'll never solve that problem. But the angle that the position, I want to say angle, but the position of where I'm coming from, those languages did not exist. They were not prominent. They had no play in the worship of God from the beginning. These things are the outgrowth of civilizations and generations of people that grew where the direction that they were going. And of course, they were idolatrous. See, I'm in the time, and I think it's a very good question that you brought up, Noah, but I'm in the period in time where I think what God is asking us to do requires the truth. I'm not really interested in trying to make peace with other religions and other preachers, and I'm not interested in doing that. And if we read the Word, when God sent the prophets out, they were of the same mind. They had a message from God, and they had to give that message from God and leave that message and be done with it. There were no speculations upon it. Jeremiah didn't look for Hananiah's bit on what he say God had said, and he didn't accept that. And because he did, he was hated by his country, his family, the whole everybody. But he gave exactly what God said. So that is where I'm coming from with this, because when God flung Noah out there, his 3 sons are going back before the flood, and when God created man, there was no such thing as different languages and different gods. There was no such thing, and that's what I want to show.
I'm just concerned that we can kind of get stuck in.
Sure. Yep.
That's really Eurocentric, because the word God comes from a German word, gut.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually, I think God knows our heart, and so we don't get caught in language. God knows our heart. So when we use the word God, we're actually saying God the Most High, because we're speaking that from the Holy Spirit. I mean, Germanic tribes used it. It was associated with demons, the word God. But we don't. But we're not calling up demons. We're not calling up good. We're calling up God, the Most High, the Creator, because that's what we're speaking from. We're speaking from the Spirit within us. And the same is true when we call out to Jesus. That was not his birth name, but God isn't stuck on vocabulary. But his birth name was Yeshua. But your name can be John, and I can call you Frank. But I believe that if John knows you're really saying John, even though you say Frank, John will still answer him. So I'm only saying that to say God is wise enough to know that even though we grew up speaking English, we're trapped in the language in which we were born. We're still calling out to Him. And that being said, people can call out for Jesus or Yeshua by his birth name and still not get the right Jesus if they're doing the wrong thing. So I'm only saying all that to say that I don't want us to become those people who are very narrow and what we say, but that we speak in a way that we know God is true by any name, by any culture, by any language. If we're calling out to the real God in our hearts and in our spirits and in our action and in our deeds and our works, and
well, I think that's
God,
a very good notation. But I hope that I am so narrow as that people will know what God I'm talking about. I won't spend a lot of time in that area because, as you say, it's easy for people to go off in that direction and never get back to what the purpose was, because those things are true. And in fact, I'm confronted with different gods and ancestral worship every time I go to Africa, and I've made 30 trips there in 28 years. So we're confronted with that all the time. In fact, we get there sometimes at their feast days where they actually offer human sacrifices, and children disappear in numbers at a certain time of the year. And when you say God, all of these different cultures, tribes, groups, come up. So it does happen. So I think that's a worthwhile comment, and certainly those things are true. In the times I've had debates with Muslims, that subject has come up. It always does, because they are trying to distract us from who God actually is. At the same time, they want to mix him with these other so-called gods, because they will not come out and say, when they say Messiah, they're not talking about Jesus. When they're talking about the Lord of Lords coming back at the rapture and after the rapture, they're not talking about Jesus. But Christians, with their common understanding and language, just assume that that's who we're talking about. So if that is the case, there shouldn't be no problem with us accepting Muslims or accepting Islam and accepting it, as a religious generic. That shouldn't bother anybody. I disagree with that. But I do take your point. I think it's very important, not to get off into that. I don't know if I had mentioned once about this guy. In fact, he's in my book, John Smith. John became a very good friend. He was a Muslim originally, and ran into John when I first got saved. John used to give me a fit, and I didn't know hardly anything then. I think I said once before, I didn't know John 3:16 at that time. And John would be waiting on me every day at the bus stop when I was going to work at Caterpillar, and he would lay me out because I didn't have any answers. I didn't know what to say. I was just a junkie that had just given his heart to the Lord. And John was standing out there one day, I was going to work, and he said, we were talking about the Lord meet your every need and all that. He went in his bill folder, he pulled out a $10,000 bill. He said, does Jesus bless you with that? And all I could say was, you know what, John? One day, you are going to give your heart to the Lord. And I was saying that based on what I knew, and all I knew was what the Lord did for me. And I never thought that would happen. I didn't see myself giving my heart to the Lord. I hadn't got to preaching yet. But it did happen 25 years later. John was at our church coming with another pastor who I considered a son and whom I ordained, came with him. He was a member of his church. When I let John have words as Reverend John Smith, a now Christian minister, he said, Bishop, I gave you a fit back there. He said, but in my heart, I really respected you and respected your stand, and I didn't mean the things that I was saying against you. He said, but I really respected you. I remember John's words, and I thought about his words when I was at his funeral. And I told him then I was going to mention him in my book. I told him because I didn't think John was going to make it long enough to see the book. He was fighting cancer, I think. But I told him that. But I remember his words and how things seemed to seem at the beginning. But he became a very close friend of mine. He would call me for counseling, marital counseling, and became a very close friend. I think that we're going to see a lot of people do that when we stand for who Christ is. If the move and the ways seem to be right now, this universalizing and this uniting everybody in one, then you got to know what that says about Satan's plan. You have to know that that is what he's out to do. Christians, therefore, should take a real stand about being specific concerning Christ. And that's all I have. That's all I've ever had. That's all I've ever known. I didn't get a chance to go and to be wrapped up in a lot of other religions, a lot of other denominations, a lot of other things like that. I didn't get a chance. All I knew was to go after Christ. And in the words of my spiritual father, Miles Monroe, when he asked me to lay out the vision and what you feel God saying to you, because we were getting ready to go and preach together in some conventions and conferences and different things. And Dr. Monroe have a lot of mixed congregations, throughout the world. And when I got to telling him about all of this, and, when I said the 12 years of God, me wrestling with God, this is what part of it was about. It was me trying to change what God was saying so it would fit in almost any audience, because, we live by our trade, and what we make, that pays our bills. So I was trying to see how to change the message to fit where I had to go. And in going over it and pondering over it and thinking over it, it wasn't working. It wasn't working just in my thinking. It didn't work in action. I honestly tried to do something different from what God was saying. It didn't work. It didn't work. I was terrible. And it was because I knew I was trying to change the message. I knew I was trying to change it, and it didn't work. People weren't accustomed to the Harold Dawson that they were hearing then. So the Lord had to shut me out and let me know, either you do this like I'm telling you to do it, or you ain't gonna do nothing. Because I thought I knew how to preach. I know how to do what they do. But he was saying to me, either you do it, do what I'm telling you to do, or you ain't gonna do nothing at all. And I got scared from that point. So it really kind of bothered me then. But